And we are officially live, and we have Dr. Alan, is it Eustace or
Eustace?
Eustace, there we go. Everyone has their own way of pronouncing their own name, and you're entitled to that. You are a computer scientist by study, is that correct?
That's true.
So when you first started out at school, did you always want to be a computer scientist? Or did you start off on a different path and then land up being a computer scientist?
So I always liked math and I always liked science. And so my dad was a mechanical engineer. He was actually an aerospace engineer. I grew up in Orlando, Florida. So when I started college, I wanted to be a mechanical engineer. And so I started mechanical engineering. One of my best friends was a mechanical engineer there as well. And then on one quarter, I took a thermodynamics class and I took a Fortran computer programming class in the same quarter. And I really hated the thermodynamics and I loved the computer science. So I switched majors, and I remember going to the co-op director because he had a co-op job for me that summer, and I said, look, I'm going to switch majors from mechanical engineering over to computer science. And he goes, oh, don't do that. There's no jobs in computer science. So, but it turned out I said that's okay. I went to computer science anyway, and found work and stuff like that to put myself through school. But from that point on, I stuck with computer science.
And then obviously when you study computer science, you didn't get involved in Google straight away. I mean, you obviously had a long journey before that.
Yeah, what is interesting. What happened to me is I went to school in a place called University of Central Florida, and they were a center of excellence for computer science at the time, and they were the first PhD program in computer science in the state. And so I was studying there, and I wrote a paper, or came out to Nevada actually, and was standing in line, to register for this conference to be able to present this paper. And the two guys standing in front of me and behind me were I struck up a conversation with. And it turned out they were John Newkirk and Rob Matthews from Stanford University, and people that I had interacted with by email at the time. And we actually struck up a very good friendship. We spent the entire time together, and at the end they invited me to come out and do research at Stanford. So I did. I went out for a year and did research, went back to Florida and got my degree. It was that moment, in there brought me out to California into the Silicon Valley. When I went back, they hired me as one of their first employees at a new startup. Then from there I went to Digital Equipment Corporation and then to Google. So anyway, one small change. So you never know what, one interaction is going to change your whole career, and that was it for me.
I mean, it could have been serendipity. It could have been a process of some people feel that their life is determined before them, and others feel that, if you just keep connecting with people, you never know what's going to come out of it. So maybe you are an expert networker.
No, that's definitely not true. I am the least networked person I know. I'm usually like in large events, and there's 100 interesting people to meet. You can usually find me over in the corner talking to one person for 3 hours on some esoteric topic. One of the last meetings I was in, somebody was talking about new propulsion systems for aircraft, and it was like, really interesting conversation. So no, I'm usually the one-on-one person on the side, not the broad networking kind of person.
Well, what I find intriguing is that obviously you have a range of interests. It's not just computers. I mean, you're talking about propulsion systems. What other things are the buzzwords that fascinate you when it comes to things that you surf online or that you are trying to engage and discuss and learn about?
So I've got a ton of things that I'm working on right now. I mean, the Stratospheric event was just premiered. A documentary on it was premiering at Tribeca in New York. So I just got back from that. I've been working with the Smithsonian on getting the suit. The suit and the balloon equipment module are at the Smithsonian. They've been there for a while, but getting them on display. My daughter had she's 16 now, but when she was 15, she came up with this bike safety invention that she filed a patent on, and so I'm working with her on a prototype. Jet Propulsion Laboratory and had an issue about landing large things on Mars, a parachute-related system, and And that got me interested in a question somebody asked me is, could you re-enter using my suit system? And there's a lot of reasons why that won't work, but there's enough overlap between that question and what Jet Propulsion Laboratory. So I actually learned how to sew and built a new parachute system. So we'll see if that works. It's just some modifications on a parachute to see if that works.
I love that. The one thing that I always tell people is that you should always follow things that you are passionate about, that you're enthusiastic about. And yes, people say, but you need to make a living, and you need. But at the end of the day, if you're passionate about it, you will make a living at some point because you'll get very good at it.
Yeah, no, passion definitely helps. I mean, I tell my kids, you should find, there are enough things that I would be interested in that I can make a living, I'm sure, by picking something that is in the set of things I'm interested in and all the sets of things that somebody's interested in paying me on. And the intersection of that is large enough for me. If there was one thing I was interested in and that's it, and no one else in the world cared about it, then I'd be a little worried.
Okay, so it's good that you have a varied range. So now we fast forward a little bit. We have someone who is quite high up in Google. You're obviously a high-profile person, but you have this bee in your bonnet that you want to go and get into a spacesuit, and then you want to travel up to the top of Earth's stratosphere with a weather balloon and then drop yourself from there. How did that ever come to your mind? I mean, I can understand you have interest in certain things, but this is beyond an interest. This must have been almost like an infatuation, because a lot of work goes into something like this.
Yeah, I know. It definitely wasn't an easy path. I mean, what had happened was, for a variety of reasons, I had quit skydiving when around 1984. And I had done a bunch of skydiving before it, and then I took up flying and other kinds of things that were interesting to me. But I won't go into the story, but I got interested in skydiving again, and so I went down to a place called Paris Valley in California, one of the premier places for skydiving, and learned how to skydive again, which turns out not to be that. Skydiving is a little like riding a bicycle. Once you've done it, it's pretty easy to do again.
Apparently.
Yeah, it was pretty straightforward. But anyway, the guy that taught me was a guy named Luigi Conti. And Luigi does a lot of really interesting work with parachutes. He does proximity flying, wingsuit flying, lots of different things. And he runs his own television station, honestly, Conti TV in Brazil. And he was interested in this problem, not me. He was interested in breaking this record, and I had a lot of experience with it. But he was an engineer, and he wanted me to come with him to a place called Mojave and look at a capsule which was set up and potentially he could buy to break this record. And I went and looked at the capsule, and he asked me what my opinion was, and I said, Luigi, honestly, I don't think this capsule is the right way to do it. I don't think capsules in general are the right way to do it. I said if it was up to me, I would basically build a suit which is capable of surviving in the stratosphere. I'd ignore the capsule because it's lighter weight and it's simpler and less complex. I said that's what I would do. And he listened to me and things like that. But his funding fell through and stuff. But after that, I couldn't get over this idea that, wow, that's the right approach, And so Red Bull was spooling up their efforts and things. But I really felt like this was the way to do it. Scuba diving for the stratosphere. It was just such a cool concept, where you have everything on you, and you don't have to. And if you read the history, capsules have caused all kinds of problems in the past, and there's lots of issues, safety issues, other kinds of issues that come with capsules, and a lot of danger associated with capsules. And this eliminated all of them. And so for me, it was like, this is the right way to solve the problem. And then, honestly, I started studying it, I started reading it, I started researching it, and at the end of a year, I thought, this is it. This is the way to go. And then I think a smarter person would have declared victory and put it in a drawer. But in the end, I wanted to build it, and then I wanted to fly it, and I wanted to see what it was like in the stratosphere, and I thought I had this, idea. And so then the trick was, how do you get somebody else to come along with this? How do you build a team and all that kind of stuff? But it was the idea that I couldn't let go of.
I thought the hard part would be how to convince your family that you want to do this.
That was also hard. They, in the early stages, my my family just never thought it was going to happen. They were in the, it's
They were
not.
laughing it off.
They were laughing it off. It's not that big a deal. But as I started building the team and stuff like that, it became more and more real. And so, and the family was not happy with it. I mean, my wife wasn't happy. The kids weren't happy because for me, I knew all the technology and stuff, and I knew all the multiply redundant systems. I knew why it was safe. I knew the team. I trusted them. But she didn't have all that, right? She just looked at history, and she would say, well, how many people have done this before? Well, it's kind of a world record. Nobody's done it before. But, so then the next thing is, well, have people tried it and been either killed or injured in an attempt to do this? And, unfortunately, history has not been kind to stratospheric attempts. And it's hard to convince her that this was a whole different approach to the problem. But anyway, she let me do it. I don't think I ever convinced her it was safe. She was always scared to death, and the family was scared to death. But what she knew was I loved working on this problem with this team, and I don't think she felt like she could take it away from me, even though every cell in her body was saying, please don't do this.
I bet you if you proposed to try and beat your record, you would get a firm no on that one.
Well, no, the joke is that she's banned me from doing anything extremely dangerous after that. And so now the question is, we're defining extremely dangerous, but I set a pretty high bar on extremely dangerous. So things like learning to fly into helicopters, wingsuits, skydiving, none of that stuff even comes close to the bar. So I'm pretty safe. There's a lot of fun things that are still left to do.
That is very cool. I had the privilege of interviewing Yves Rossi a couple of weeks ago, and he's the jet man, and he flies around with the actual wings on him, and just like you, safety is obviously the most critical thing from a redundancy point of view. Everything that he designed in those wings was about safety and making sure that he can get to the ground and be alive and not harmed. So I'm sure that obviously as a computer scientist, problem solving is in your blood. That is your first goal, to make sure that you get there and get back safely. But how that's going to happen is obviously quite a challenge.
Well, the safety is, from the very beginning, the design was set up, and the specification of the design was, I have to get an unconscious person from the stratosphere down to Earth safely. In other words, it doesn't depend on my skydiving ability. It doesn't depend on, fantastic, piloting skills or anything like that. I have to get somebody who's unconscious down safely. And so, when you put the restrictions at the beginning of the project that it has to be safe for an unconscious diver, then it actually, in some ways, makes things simpler because, that you're not depending on the jumper to get out of a capsule and get to the front and then drop down. You have to instantly be able to let somebody go. You're not depending on them pulling the parachute, even though, in this case I did pull the parachute, but you've got automatic openers that are going to pull the parachute if I don't. You've got to have an area that you're over that doesn't have trees and land, lakes and stuff like that. So in some sense, by specifying it early, it made the process harder in some ways. But it made the criteria for success much more distinct. So, you didn't depend on it. And, it caused us, for instance, to invent an anti-spin system, which, obviously Red Bull didn't have. And Felix had a really horrible spin, and he did probably the greatest skydiving that's ever been done to essentially get out of an inverted flat spin at over Mach 1 and right himself. But we had to design a system that made it so that was impossible, rather than trying to depend on me to be able to get out of it. So, different approach.
Did you consult with Felix about it, or was it something that you thought, well, I've seen what he had to do, and let's make sure that we don't get into that same situation?
Well, we were going back and forth on whether we wanted a drogue parachute or not, because we could have either had it or not. And after we saw his spin, we said, okay, we're going to go with the drogue. But the first. And drogue is a smaller parachute that basically slows you down and keeps you right face to earth. And we thought just having the drogue would eliminate the spin problem. But when we tried it with dummies at 90,000 feet, we found out that it not only didn't fix the spin, it actually exacerbated the spin. So we had a dummy that was basically spinning from 90,000 feet at 200 RPM. And if we had gone to 135,000 feet, it would have spun at 400 RPM. So both completely fatal. So it's not just having a drogue, it's having a drogue in the right configuration. And we had to learn that through kind of looking at the literature and then kind of painful trial and error. But Red Bull did a really nice thing. They actually had a scientific debriefing after their jump, like, I don't know, 6 months after in Los Angeles. And a lot of different people in the audience, where they went through all the systems and all the decision making that they had done and why they had done. Art Thompson, Joe Kittinger were there, an amazing set of people. And listening to what they had said, you know, we were furiously taking notes on everything because what we were doing was secret. At the time, no one knew. But they did have an influence in some things. They had an emergency drogue system that they had designed, and they had done some testing, which turned out to be really valuable to us in designing our system. So thank you to the Red Bull team.
Wow. But now the Red Bull team obviously spent a lot of money putting all these things and marketing, and it was on YouTube, and it was incredibly, I think it was probably one of the most watched YouTube videos in the world.
Yeah.
You, on the other hand, I read about it in the paper, and I thought, what? How did I miss this on YouTube? Why was yours under the radar?
So we, Red Bull, in order to put something on, like this on, it costs, a bunch of money to be able to do it. And there's really, in history, it's all come from sponsorships. So any money for this kind of thing, if you're a person like me, you would go to a bunch of different people and you would find a sponsor. And that's what happened with Red Bull. Red Bull became the sponsor, and they provided all the money to make this happen over like a 10-year period. And the reason they would put in that money is because they want to sell a product, and this is really important for establishing their brand. And I think most people would agree that the Red Bull stratospheric thing was the best branding that anybody has ever done in history. I mean, it wasn't just great, it was outstanding. I mean, even when I think of Stratosphere right now, that image of Felix on the edge of that capsule stepping off comes to mind. I get goose pimples just thinking about it, right? And that's what they wanted to do. They wanted to create this amazing brand experience, and they also paired that with an amazing engineering team to pull it off. So it wasn't just about branding, it was about engineering too. But for me, it was very different. I was interested in the science and the engineering piece. I didn't care about selling any kind of product, right? It wasn't Red Bull drink that I was trying to do. I was just trying to do the science and technology piece. And I went to my boss, Larry Page at Google, and asked, and he said, if you want, Google will contribute to this. But for me, that kind of takes it away from the science. And I also wanted complete control over all the variables. Like at one point, we had a really bad test. It had gone super bad, and there was, I mean, it wasn't like something that was life-threatening, but it was, we had missed, I mean, out of 10 deliverables on this particular thing, we missed probably 8 of them, and we were going to have to go back and redesign like everything. I mean, the entire system was going to have to get redesigned, and it was going to take a year. We didn't know at the time, but it was going to take a year, which was like a huge amount of time. That was going to extend this project from a year to or a year and a half to almost 3 years to do it. But that's what we needed to do to make it safe and to prove out this system from the altitude that we wanted to do. And so I didn't have to beg to a sponsor. I just had to do it. And then the other nice thing about it is, if you have that many people, like they had over 500 reporters on site for this live event, live feeds and all this, and if the weather's just a little off, if the hardware isn't working exactly like you want, if you're going to tell them, oh, go home, and at some point in the future, we'll wait for the wind to be right, or what they're saying, that's a hard decision for them to make, right? There's a lot of pressure on that decision. And then but for us, we didn't have to do that. If the weather wasn't right, I had one reporter there. That's it. So, it's like everybody goes home, comes back. It's not that big a deal. So for us, and also when it's over and you've succeeded, it's only you and the team. It's all your best friends, the people that put their hard sweat in it, been there You don't have to entertain this massive press contingent. And for me, that was way more important than getting the recognition. But when somebody will say, hey, this is the guy that broke the record, and the first thing they always say to me is, are you Felix Baumgartner?
Yes, I was going to say. I mean, when I said I was going to be speaking to you, they said, well, you're speaking to Felix. I said, no, someone actually beat his record. They said, when did they beat his record? I said, it happened like in the last 2 years or so. No one's beaten his record. I mean, people don't even know about the fact that you beat it. How much did you beat his record by?
Well, there's actually multiple records, but the one that's most important to me is the one that's the highest exit altitude, and that was 135,890 feet. So, and his record was set at 128,000 feet. So it's a pretty significant jump.
It's a huge
from that. And what makes it more, in order to go an extra 10,000 feet, you have to double your balloon. Normally, you have to double your balloon size. So 10,000 feet is a huge amount because you have to get a much larger balloon. But one of the nice things is they were lifting a 3,200 pound capsule to 128,000 feet, which required the largest balloon that anybody has ever flown, 28 million cubic feet. And whereas because I was so small and lifting only 600 pounds, I actually used a balloon that was almost a third the size, 11 million cubic feet. So the fact that I was doing this much smaller scuba diving thing made the balloon that I was having to use and the systems for launching balloons much simpler.
Well, I mean, I've launched weather balloons before, and we did a great exercise where we put a tiny little payload, and there was a little camera that was streaming live, and we had Google Maps and tracking and Google Earth, and we could see where the balloon was moving, and it was very, very exciting. You, on the other hand, were hanging from this balloon. I mean, I need to load the picture because people actually need to see this. Let's go to share screen, and let's pick one. Let's go with this one over here. So can you talk us through this particular image? There's one of you just hanging. How long were you in that suit for before you commenced your flight? And what happens if you needed the bathroom?
So the one on the left is, well, let's start on the upper right. The upper right one is this was the first of 5 airplane jumps, and this was the jump that did not go well. There was a bunch of things that didn't go well in this particular jump, I had a turn that I couldn't actually control. I had trouble pulling the ripcord. I had trouble depressurizing the suit. So this was the upper right was I think the low point of the test is after this. I mean, it was a great test in the sense that we had gone out of an airplane. We had flown the suit, had a parachute, we had a landing. I mean, a lot of things went really well, but there were a bunch of things that required us to spend a lot of time straightening it out. The one on the left is probably the first of the balloon launches, and this might even have been a test launch. I might not have been even connected. Before we did manned balloon launches, what we would do is we would get me suited and ready, and then they would move me out to the launch area, and they would actually fill up a balloon, but instead of me, they would put an iron dummy with all the same equipment on me that I would be wearing there, and or something very similar. And then they would make sure that these two threads would come together correctly, and then we would launch the dummy up to very high altitudes, and then we go through the release and the descent and the chase and all that kind of stuff. So the one on the left is one of our test jumps before, and the one on the lower right is actually after one of the 3 balloon jumps or one of the airplane jumps. Is kind of hard to tell from this one. I think it's the last jump. I think it's after the record was set, and so that was when things were pretty much finished.
Wow. Okay, so now I want to just kind of trace what was going on there. You attach yourself in a specialized suit. It's not just a regular spacesuit or a thermal jacket and pants. What was so special about this particular suit?
So I can just take you through the whole kind of record launch, and you can kind of get a feel for what happens. So, you know, the team launches generally happen around dawn. So the team gets up about 10 o'clock at night. I get up about 12:30. We get there at 1. We've already done a lot of preparations the previous day. We've flown the exact track where we're going to do in a helicopter. We've checked out all the possible landing areas. And then when I get up, we do a brief on, you know, for the whole team. And then at about 1:30 is when I start a pre-breathe protocol. So I'm breathing pure oxygen to get rid of the nitrogen in my system, because nitrogen can cause decompression sickness. And then around 3 a.m. they start putting the suit on. It takes about an hour and a half to put the suit on. It's a very complicated process to get the suit on. Pressurize the suit, get it all ready. I have a diaper on, which I actually will use during the flight. And so then what happens is I get moved out to the balloon, and in parallel, the meteorologists are seeing if the weather is going to be good enough. And if the weather is good enough, they'll lay out the balloon, which is a big process. It's a big balloon. It weighs over 1,000 pounds. You lay it out. You got a big helium truck, and then at some point they decide. And they have to just determine exactly what layout, because it has to be exactly aligned with the wind. And then about 5 a.m. they make a decision that, yes, we're going to launch. And they start doing the first things about putting the helium in the balloon. And only a small portion of the balloon. As the balloon rises, it's going to expand. So only a tiny portion has helium at that point. And then if things look good, what happens is they'll stand up that balloon, and it will have connections to the ground, but I won't be connected to it, because balloons are dangerous in the wind, right? They can drag you around and stuff like that. So the balloon is just standing. And then what happens is, at the time when everybody believes things are perfect, then they drive me in underneath, and they attach me to 2 connections, only 2 connections, one electrical, one mechanical. And then so they attach me to that. And then within 20 seconds, I'm in the air. They do the countdown, and I'm gone. And it's all based on, you know, the wind at the time, and whether it's you know, whether it's calm enough to actually do a launch. But then I launch, and then on the way up, I've got 2 hours and 7 minutes to just hang out. 2 hours and 7 minutes on the way up, climbing about 1,000, 1,200 feet per minute. And then I get up to the top, and then at that point, you know, we have a decision on when we want to release. We release pretty early. Then it's 4 minutes and 27 seconds down at speeds of up to 822 miles an hour. And then you break the sound barrier, so you don't feel anything different in the sound barrier, but the people on the ground hear a sonic boom, which is fun. And then you open it 10,000 feet above the ground, you drift down, and you land. And everybody laughs at my landings, because it's not really a landing, it's more of a crash. I don't know if you've ever seen it. Like a forward flip. I mean, I'm landing with 405 pounds and a suit that doesn't bend and toggles that I can't pull all the way down. So, but I've never gotten hurt in any of the crashes. You know, it's a very protective environment. So that's the whole thing from start to finish.
Wow. Okay, so there are a couple of things I need to ask, and I know that we've got a couple of email questions through, and some of the participants would like to ask as well. This one is a question from Mikey, and he's age 9. He said, obviously, how long did you fall for? And you said 4.5 minutes. Is that correct?
Yeah, 4 minutes 27 seconds was how long I fell.
Before you pulled your parachute.
Before you pulled the parachute, 4 minutes 27 seconds.
So what do you do when you are free falling for 4 minutes and 20-something seconds?
Yeah, it doesn't sound like a very long time, but it is a really long time. It definitely feels long. You know, the thing is that the spin-resistant system is meant to work without my input. So the main thing I'm trying to concentrate on the way down is not doing anything, you know. And you think not doing anything is easy, but it turns out just making sure that you've got your hands in tight, your legs in position, and you're trusting the system that you've designed, because if you throw an arm out, you are going to spin, you know. So you want to make sure to stay really tight in it. And then if you do need to make any corrections at all, you need to make them really tiny. So I would look at the view. I'm kind of if you look at the videos, I'm kind of bobbing up and down, like, you know, those, you know, like at like 0.76 hertz. So that's going on, which is kind of disorienting, but I'm so used to it at this point, it's not that big a deal. and then making sure that I stay straight. And then I'm looking down at my altimeter. I have two, one that's down by my chest and one that's on my arm, and watching the altitude tick off. And because the altimeter is exponential, at the very top, it's like the increments are like 30,000 feet. So it doesn't really seem like it's moving at one point. And so you look down, then you look up, then you look down. And of course you see this beautiful, right as I released, I actually did some, 2 backflips, and I got to see a beautiful, view of this giant balloon above me. And, it was just, it was a gorgeous thing on the way down. And then, as you get lower, then you have to worry about pulling. So getting yourself in a position, aligning yourself. If you're in a turn at pull, you can get line twists, which are not super dangerous, but you certainly don't want them. And then you pull, and then, at that point, you have to check your canopy, make sure that there's no malfunction, because then you have to do more things if there's a malfunction. But at that point, you kind of relax. And we did this really cool thing was when I opened, which is 10,000 feet, pretty high. Another plane came over, and the guy who did all my parachute work, packed all the parachutes, built 11 different versions of this rig. He flew over and jumped out next to me. And so he actually was my wingman on the way in, and he would help me with things like power lines and other stuff. So, you're all alone for this whole thing, and then when you open up, all of a sudden, kind of one of your best friends on the project opens up next to you, and you come down together. And when I land, he was there 11 seconds after I touched the ground. So, it was magical to have him actually there with me.
That is insane. But now we need to back up a little bit, because you kind of glanced over a few things that I'm still trying to get my head around. What was that first feeling like? Because obviously you had done a few tests before. When you were high enough to see the curvature of the Earth with your own eyes, and did you have a GoPro to kind of capture exactly what you would always hope that you'd wanted to see while you were up there?
Yeah, and when you were talking about your balloon GoPro experiment, right now almost anybody can put a GoPro up into space and actually see what it looks like. And I think those visions of what a GoPro looked like was part of the incentive for the project, because you can't look at that view without saying, boy, I wish I was there to see it.
Of course.
And so for me, those images were really great. And so I had 4 GoPros on me, 2 of which we knew weren't going to make it all the way up to altitude because they were battery powered, and batteries, it's super cold. The transition's super cold, and so we knew those batteries would die. They ended up dying around 50,000 feet, which is where we expected them to. But 2 cameras stayed on the whole way. One that was looking through my legs, and one that was looking from my right shoulder over. And so they got beautiful, beautiful views of what it looks like, and it's very different. I mean, as you go higher and higher, you get very different views of the Earth. And once you get above, I don't know, probably 85,000 feet, you really see the darkness of space in a way that you've never done before. And you're looking down on all these layers of the atmosphere. You're above like 99.8% of the atmosphere at 135,000 feet. So it's beautiful. I mean, it is absolutely stunningly gorgeous to see that kind of view and see the Earth from there, and see them, very small things. The cities look like, dimes, on the Earth, and whole fields look like a little patchwork of, tiny little needlepoint down there. So, I mean, the view is unbelievable, and I certainly had a lot of time to look at it. So it was gorgeous.
But now, if you had gone higher, what would have been the cutoff point for you? Because if you go too high, either the balloon is going to pop, or you're also going to reach a point where there's very little gravity.
Okay, so 2 different questions. The first question is how high you go, totally dependent on balloon size. So what happens is that as the balloon's going up, it expands. And the nice thing about expanding is you keep the same rate of climb. Because the balloon's expanding, the number of molecules inside that balloon as it expands, it's displacing the same amount of weight, and so you're going to continue to go up linearly. When you get up to float altitude, what that means is the balloon has run out of expansion. So now, instead of expanding at vents, and you stop almost immediately there. You go through these little small fiducials, but for most part it stops. So you're not going any higher unless you get a bigger balloon. If I had Felix's balloon at 29 million, I probably would have stopped at 145,000 feet, or maybe even 150,000. feet. So there's room to go a little higher. But there's no worry about gravity. That's a misconception, is that gravity doesn't go away. It's not just a good idea, it's the law. So no matter how high you go, gravity is going to pull you back down. The reason astronauts have experienced zero gravity is because they're falling around the Earth in this orbit the whole time. So gravity, no matter where I am, it's going to let me go, unless I got so close to the moon that the moon's gravity would be closer. So I'm always going to fall down. But what's interesting is at the moment you release, since I'm falling at exactly the rate of gravity, then I am in zero gravity because I'm falling. And so in zero gravity, you have no control, right? You have no surfaces to things. So there you are, whatever momentum that you have is just going to continue until you get to the point where the resistance, your speed combined with the resistance of the air starts slowing you down. And what's fascinating about the speed is that normally the faster you go, the noisier it is, right? But in this particular case, there's no noise because there's no atmosphere slowing you down. So the faster you go is really based on speed is really the absence of noise. When you start hearing noise, it's not because you're speeding up, it's because you're slowing down. So the 822 miles an hour was 51 seconds in. It was almost silent.
But now you said you broke the speed of sound. Is that correct?
That's true.
The sound barrier.
1.22 times the speed of sound.
And they heard it on Earth, but you didn't hear it.
Yes, that is true.
Why didn't you hear it?
There is no, I mean, I've talked to a lot of people that have broken the speed of sound since then. No one actually knows when it's a dial on an instrument, you know, if you're in an airplane. In my case, there's nothing that you know. Your system is actually falling. You're not experiencing any of the sonic, the breaking of the sound barrier, the sonic wave, anything like that. You're not experiencing any of that. So for you, it doesn't. You can't feel it. The hearing's the same. Everything's the same. Same thing with airplanes. It's only outside that you have this sonic shock wave that is happening, which is causing sonic booms and stuff like that. But you don't see it at all.
Sure. Now, I know that Mr. McNulty, his class had to leave, but he had a couple of questions. And the first question was obviously, how did the balloon pop? And then the second question was, were you scared while you were up there?
Okay, so getting a balloon down is actually really hard. A lot of reasons for that, but you can't let the balloon continue to float up there because it's giant. It's like the size of a football field or something like that, and wandering around national airspace is bad. So you have to get it down. And so typically you'd have two ways of getting it down. A vent system would do it, but the problem with a vent is you open a vent and the delta pressure inside and outside that balloon is almost zero. So the vent doesn't actually vent very much, so that by itself isn't that effective. And then the other way that you typically do is you drop something that's heavy and it rips a gore, but that only worked about half the time. And so we ended up taking what's called this detonation cord and actually wrapping it around the top of the balloon, and we'd fire that, and it would actually it wouldn't explode, but it would burn around that, and then that would burn a big hole in the thing. Not so much that it would create this fiery balloon coming down, but enough so that it would break the these load tapes that are in there. And so then the balloon comes down pretty fast. I mean, it probably reaches 400 miles an hour, and when it hits the ground, it's probably going 60, 70 miles an hour. So you have to be pretty careful about where you drop it. But luckily in eastern New Mexico, there's a lot of places with nothing.
And then, of course, were you scared? I mean, when you first did the initial test, I mean, you must have been. Were you at ease? Were you comfortable? Were you quite nervous?
Earlier tests, there was a level of anxiety. I wouldn't say I was scared, but I was anxious and super focused about what my role was. Like, if this happens, do this. If this happens, do this. If this happens, do that. But by the time we got to the final one, I wasn't nervous at all. I mean, we had already run 5 airplane jumps. We had done 3 balloon chests, 57,000 feet, 105,000, 135,000. And so at that point, I was actually super relaxed. Actually, in all the jumps, I was pretty relaxed. if you get nervous, then you start using a lot of oxygen. And the most important thing you can do is to conserve your oxygen, because you only have so much of it, right? And we had good margins on our oxygen, but nervousness, definitely you're going to use a lot more oxygen. So, for me, it was the most important thing was to just say super, super relaxed, almost to the point of sleeping. It was like right on the edge of sleeping on the way up, which was kind of funny to do.
Wow.
But
well, then the other question was, what type of material would you have to make the balloon out of? Because, I mean, for example, a lot of the weather balloons are made from some sort of synthetic rubber.
Yeah, there's latex balloons in most of them.
Latex, yeah. So what was your balloon made out of?
It's kind of a similar kind of material to what you might have in like baggies. These really, really small polyethylene style things, and is what the balloon's made of. And it's supplemented by this things called load tapes, which basically look like strings that run through the thing. And the balloon itself, there's no place in the U.S. that actually builds balloons of this size and scale. The only place that does it is a place called Raven Aerostar, and they only do scientific balloons. They will not do any manned balloons. Red Bull actually got some kind of balloons that were sold for scientific purposes, but they were using those balloons, which is how they ended up with their balloons. But for us, we didn't have that option, and so we ended up going to India for our balloons, a group called TFIR, and they built fantastic balloons, really, really good balloons, and they had only sold one manned balloon ever in their history. But it was to a friend of mine who was actually my balloon advisor, and so we had a good relationship with them, and so they ended up selling us not just one balloon, but we needed a bunch of balloons for testing, dummy drops, things like that. So they were really good, really kind to us, and whereas we went into the space race early, they actually continued to evolve their balloon technologies, and they're world class. They're very good.
Wow. But now you had a custom balloon made. You had a custom suit made, obviously because all the research that you put in told you that you can't just do this jump without specialized equipment.
Yeah,
now that you've got all of it.
Yeah, the suit was a hard part because there's only a couple manufacturers in the U.S. of suits, and only one that actually makes a spacesuit that's capable of dealing with this environment. A company called ILC Dover. And Tabor, who from Paragon Space Development Corporation, who was my general contractor, and honestly, without them, this project would have never happened. He approached ILC Dover, and they were willing to build a suit for us, a specialized suit, first suit that's been designed from scratch and tested in 30 or 40 years, and the first time they had ever sold the suit to any civilian project ever. And they're the ones that built the Apollo suits and the extra vehicle activity suits in the space stations. They have a lot of experience. So we're really lucky we got the best people. At the end, I thought you could use this suit for anything. You could set the record for a balloon up and down. You could do hang gliding from the stratosphere. You could do pretty much anything that you wanted to do in the stratosphere using it. But my wife, because she kind of banned me from doing any more flights, my team actually, I think, got jealous of looking at this beautiful view of the darkness of space and curvature of the Earth. So they went off and started a company that's going to build balloons that take up capsules, but above the capsule is a fully open parachute. And so when you release, instead of going supersonic and free fall, you're actually under a parachute the whole way and to glide down and be able to land. So they're building those systems right now. So I lost the team. My wife probably would have divorced me, and then the suit I ended up donating to the Smithsonian National Air and Space Museum. They wanted the suit, so it's there. It's not on display yet. It should be on display by the end of the year. So I don't have a suit anymore, so I can't do all the other fun things I wanted to do with it.
But I mean, was there a fight to see who would get a chance to host the suit?
No, I always wanted to go to the Smithsonian. I mean, it's one of my favorite museums in the world. They have, they have, the Wright brothers flyer, and they've got the, X1, the airplane. It's just a beautiful place. I visited there 100 times. I mean, if there's a mecca for aviation enthusiasts, it's probably there. So anyway, there wasn't any real question. If I had a choice, I wanted to go there.
So now I want to get on to something a little bit different. The Humans to Mars Summit is taking place from the 17th to the 19th of May. And there's obviously a lot of talk about landing on Mars, getting there, how we're going to sustain ourselves, come back to Earth, and do all those sorts of things. From your experience, what sort of things would you be able to apply to getting to Mars, maybe even landing on Mars that way? Or perhaps if there was an astronaut that was in distress, could they technically get back to Earth and land the same way you did it?
Well, it's a complicated thing. First, I think the Mars things, I mean, it's amazing. I mean, what Elon Musk and SpaceX are trying to do is incredible on like a lot of different dimensions. I mean, I think the basic idea of understanding that the cost of the fuel for spacecraft is actually tiny. I mean, it's like 1% of the cost of a space launch is the fuel. So if you could actually reuse a spacecraft, you can cut the cost of space down by maybe not factor of 100, but certainly large factors, which makes space now so much more accessible for satellites and other kinds of things. So if that's successful, then not only can you make space, for science really possible, but the next generation of rockets, you can easily build things in space. And so the question is, how would you build, can you build a fully functioning, Mars Explorer kind of thing that can take, 1,000 people to Mars, simultaneously and be able to build a community there? And, I think there's too many people that have doubted Elon Musk and been proven wrong. So I feel like that's going to happen. I don't think there's a huge technological breakthrough that has to happen. There's a lot of hard work, but he's proven, almost all of the key components at this point. So I think that's likely to happen. Now, getting volunteers to go to Mars, with the idea that you don't have anywhere near the number of trips back that you do there, I think that might be harder. But and you also have to build a community there. How would you build a community in a place that's far away? So I mean, there's all kinds of there's technical challenges, but I actually think they're less than the, kind of the people side of things. What kind of destination would make it so that 1,000 people would want to go on what could be the grandest adventure that's ever been done, and populate a new planet? And I think there's lots of fun stuff there. It's an interesting area.
Wow. So I mean, is space exploration one of your interests?
Yeah, no, it's definitely. I gave a talk down at SpaceX. I spent some time with Elon. I talked to a bunch of different people there. Yeah, no, I love space. I mean, I feel like there's, we're about to get into an era where, space, the stratosphere, all these areas become accessible. I mean, new kinds of propulsion systems. I was reading about various new propulsion systems that can potentially do much faster travel, could even make it possible to go to, other solar systems. I mean, it's like, it's kind of the golden age for trying to figure out what the next generation of space travel would look like. And so anyway, I'm bullish on it. It's fun for me. I talked to everybody. Like I just visited X-Core. They're trying to do rockets to, take planes up and allow people to experience space and come back down and land and do multiple flights a day. So anyway, there's so many fun things going on out there. I think people will get a chance to go to space. They're not going to have to do it like I did. There's going to be, in our lifetime, there will be ways to get to, anybody can get to space.
That is incredible. I mean, I do know that when I spoke to Charlie Bolden, the one thing that I found which was quite intriguing is that, NASA has a plan to get to Mars by 2030, and Elon Musk just comes along and says, no, let's just cut a couple of years off that, and he might change his mind in 6 months' time and say, no, let's cut another 6 months off that. I mean, the potential of private investors to do the most incredible things because, like you said, they have full control over the project. It really means that the world is obviously going to benefit from that. But now you were quite involved with a small company called Google. You're no longer involved with them, or you still involved with them?
So yeah, so I retired. I was at Google for 13 years. I retired in April, so it's been just over a year since I retired, and I'm still involved with them. I still love Google. I was at an event, Google event last night. I still advise a few of their projects and try to help them out when I can. And of course, I'm still in touch with Larry Page, the founder, and helping him out on a few projects, both inside Google and outside of Google. But no, I don't have a day job now. I don't have to drive in every day, and I don't get phone calls in the middle of the night to go solve some crisis in Europe or something like that. If there's a project that I'm doing, it's because I selected it. I mean, I probably do too many things. I've got like 5 projects going on, and I probably should have 1 project going on. But anyway, I'm sorting through it.
Well, you know what they say, you're not retired. You are, when you take a tire and you retire it. So you're basically putting on a new set of wheels, and you're exploring other opportunities of things that you're passionate about.
Yeah, and
that's
really what's going on right now. Is I've got some ideas in some areas that I think are, potentially interesting, and it involves me kind of going back to being an engineer. On one project, I'm actually, I've got some Arduinos, and I'm building prototypes of things in my office, and it's super fun, and nowadays, you can build pretty actually interesting, pieces of hardware, for, $25 or something like that. And it's nice. It's really cool. And so I'm doing that, and I'm studying, I'm going back and, trying to relearn differential equations, because it turns out 2 of my projects require a lot of differential equations. So anyway, I'm a student again.
Well, I'm very glad to hear that you are still a big fan of mathematics, because obviously we are huge fans, and we want kids to know that by studying math and science, it opens doors for you, and it certainly gives you more options available. The other thing that I found very interesting is obviously from a company point of view, Google is very innovative. In fact, very secretively, we might have a team coming from the US in the next week or 2 to film a project that we're involved with called the Imagination Chapter, where we get kids to use things like makey-makeys and Arduinos, and we're trying to reintroduce the maker movement and show them that coding and all those sorts of things are very exciting, which I don't have to sell to you, because I think you obviously know the importance of that. But I do see that companies like Google, for example, with all this other technology that's going on, will jump onto that bandwagon and combine their efforts. And I did ask Sam Shkamemi, who was just I interviewed him before you, about the International Space Station, and I asked, when will it be possible for me to have a Google Hangout with the astronauts and actually have people join in and get kids to ask questions? And he said, we haven't thought about that at all, but it's a very doable thing, and the technology that they're using is certainly gearing towards that direction. So I did offer to be the first person to run a Google Hangout with the International Space Station, and hopefully we'll get there. So
that'll be fun.
I think so. I'll invite you to. So, is there any advice that you would give young people? I mean, you've obviously had a wonderful career. You've had incredible opportunities. Some of it was serendipity, and some of it, obviously, I assume, was hard work and blood, sweat, and tears. But is there any advice you'd give to young people in terms of what it is they should choose in the future? Where do you think we're moving in the future? What kinds of things would you tell young people about their futures?
Well, I have 2 daughters, one that's 10 and one that's 16. So it's, but what I tell them probably is they'll probably do the opposite if they're anything like me when I was a kid. But I think right now there's a lot of huge opportunities right now. I mean, I think we've reached a point where many of the problems in the world that my generation and previous generations, created, it's possible, to solve them. And, there are a lot of good ideas out there. I think the main thing that, I tell people is you have to be curious. You have to really look around you and want to understand why things work the way they do, and you have to be you have to look at them and ask, well, could it be done a better way? I mean, is there a new insight that I could have and bring to something? And people think that great insights are somehow reserved for the people that are maybe have the highest test scores and things like that. It's not true. I mean, great insights can come from anybody, but it's mostly this idea of looking at problems in different ways. And so your curiosity, and then trying to get things done. I mean, I think a lot of people, they're the dreamers, but they don't take any steps to actually make their dreams happen. And I remember reading a talk, listening to a talk a friend of mine gave, and he said, if you want to do something, whatever it is, try to just take one step toward it anytime you get, like if you want to learn to play guitar, buy a guitar book or listen to guitar music, or, find somebody who likes to play the guitar and talk to them about it. Just take steps, continually take steps toward the things that, are interesting. And, don't be so narrow as to only be interested in like one thing, because I think the real excitement right now is the way areas are coming together. Like, you say, oh, I want to be a doctor, but, being a doctor, I mean, there's lots of good advantages of being a doctor, but what's really interesting right now is this, medicine and computer science are combining to try to understand, what are the basic mechanisms that cause cell degeneration to happen? What are the mutations that happen that are causing all disease, but also all aging? And so it's the combination of those two that's really exciting and can cause amazing things. The same thing is true with global warming. Same thing is true with space travel. I mean, all these different things. So kind of broaden out the things that you're interested in. Be curious about it. Ask questions about it. Take steps along the way to actually do something when you're interested in it. And I think there's probably no better time to live and no better time to study, and there's no brighter future than I think kids have right now. So it's an exciting time.
Well, you say that now, but I have been watching your presidential candidates, and some of them
you've
are.
Got to say you've got to say it's an exciting time. It may not be a good time, but it's an exciting time.
I mean, you've got climate denialists. You've got some very interesting people. I'll try not to mention any names who might be Republican and might trump the whole argument. But I mean, what is fascinating is watching all of this go on, and I seem to ask, first world country, is this really happening? I mean, seriously? I mean, do we really have people who deny that there's climate change happening? I mean, really?
Well, I think that's, partly it's media and the way the media portrays things. A typical thing that the media will do is, they'll have a debate on climate change, and it will have one person that denies climate change, and it will have one person that, says that climate change is happening. And in some sense, they'll go back and forth, and you can believe whoever you believe. But what's behind the scenes is there's 1,000 people that agree with the person on the right side, and there's nobody who agrees with the person on the left side.
I see.
So the media portrays it as a debate, but it's not a debate. I mean, it's a fact. I mean, everybody who's ever looked at the data, understands it's a fact. And what they can do is they can take subtleties of the argument. Like, there are pieces of, like, what happens to clouds. Clouds are a really important part of the whole equation of global warming. And if for some reason, some perturbation causes clouds to basically fill up, go over the entire world, then that would dramatically change the climate equations. But I mean, it's like it's such a low probability that that's going to happen. No credible scientists will do it. But there are the graspers for straws, right, that will say, well, you haven't done the analysis because you haven't modeled clouds, which is, by the way, almost impossible to model. And so I don't know. I blame a little bit the media on this, because they're supporting viewpoints that are not, I think, scientifically, credible, things. But, but also, science can be wrong too. I mean, it is possible that science is wrong. I mean, plate tectonics, we take it as a given. It was formally proposed as a theory by a non-geologist in 1912 or something like that, with all the arguments, and it wasn't adopted by the geologists until like 1962. And when you ask why, it's not because the theories had changed. It's not because the evidence had changed. And when you ask the guy why, it finally got adopted, and he goes, well, all the people that doubted it died, and all the new people basically looked at it a different way. And so, we should all be, looking at things and challenging things and things like that. But in terms of climate change, I think the problem is that it's not something you can wait around another 50 years and get another 50 years of evidence to be able to solve it. You have to do something now. So anyway.
Well, I'm very pleased to hear that you are obviously encouraging your daughters to be curious and to continuously think. I mean, as a father of two daughters, it's very important that I encourage them not to do math and science, but to love it. And then they will do it on their own, as long as I can make them curious and introduce them to all the exciting things that are out there. On that note, obviously, your time is very precious. Being retired means that you have golf and luncheons and things to do. I'm kidding. I know that you
do, but yeah, and I do play golf, but no, my schedule has gotten even busier since I left. Different kind of scheduling. It's not back-to-back meetings all day, but it is busy.
It's a good busy. It's a nice busy. Well, we wish you all the best of luck. Thank you so much for giving up of your time. And I know that we had a whole bunch of people who were watching it live on YouTube. We had a few that joined us as well, but had to leave because of some of the American schools are doing testing in the school, so it's quite difficult for them to manage to participate live, but they will watch the recording afterwards. Thank you so much for giving of your time and your energy and your enthusiasm. And I do think that what you did was absolutely crazy, but it's my kind of crazy because it was well thought through. It showed that you are a pioneer in something that, even though there was big money and sponsorship behind the whole Red Bull campaign, you came in and said, I'm going to do it differently. And now you've pioneered something, which means that others who want to beat your record are probably going to be looking at your model and see what they can do about it. So that's very exciting.
Yeah, that's very true. And I mean, the thing that I think is really important is having ideas really important. But what's most important is building a team of people that, can actually do it. Because there's no way I could have done all the stuff here. I mean, I'm not an expert in any of the different sub-disciplines, but I could build a team and then I could learn from that team. And so for me, the fun part in the end is I got to learn about the balloons and aeromedical and, life support systems and, all these things that I would never know before. So the act of doing something brings you in contact with, these exciting, interesting, smart people. And if you take advantage of that, it'll be to your benefit.
Do you go to all these summits? I mean, are you going to pop into the Humans Mars Summit? I mean, do these things interest you that you attend as a guest, or do they kind of rope you in as a speaker?
I try not to do speaking things. So actually, this is rare. That you hit the hot button, which is kids. I'm really interested in kids. But I try not to do very many speaking engagements. I think I've got maybe 2 coming up or something like that. I'm more of a doer kind of person. This stuff was really nice. I really enjoyed it. It's a chapter in my life, but I'm not the kind of person that just relives the same thing over and over. I've put my feet up and not do anything. This is one chapter. It's a nice chapter. Google is a great chapter in my life, but I'm much more interested in solving the next really interesting problem than kind of reliving the past. So, for me, to the extent that I can use this, to inspire other people to do interesting things and to, it's an accessible problem to kids. And so, because, things like the thermal balloons, you can do the math on almost all these different things.
I was going to say, there's a whole educational program that you could develop. In fact, that was the one thing I liked about the Red Bull campaign, is that they had an educational component. But I mean, if one had taken yours and done the full marketing, there could have been worksheets that kids could have downloaded, lesson plans, and they could have been watching together. And
yeah, my wife has been after me. The Smithsonian, one of the things they're going to do is an educational thing with a lot of video and stuff. So you should be seeing that at some point. So anyway, I think it'd be great.
All right. All right. Okay. Well, thank you so much. Keep well, and we'll be in touch. Okay.
Okay. Bye-bye.
I'm going to stop the broadcast here.